This is verse 35. Better is one's own law though imperfectly carried out, than the law of another carried out perfectly. Better is death in the fulfilment of one's own law, for to follow another's law is perilous. Sri Krishna has told Arjuna in the last verse that he should not come under the sway of attachment or aversion, because they are both his enemies. And here he says that it is more important when a person follows his own swadharma, which is can be translated as his righteous duty. This would be the best thing for him. Sri Krishna actually goes on further and says that death in fulfillment of one's own law is better than following another's law. And we must try to understand this verse properly. When we try to understand this verse, we should make one thing clear in our minds. Sri Krishna is actually talking about swadharma, even though the actual word used is dharma here. When the word is used in the Gita, the word dharma, its meaning is very specific. It doesn't necessarily refer to religions such as Hindu, Muslim, Sikh or Christian, because these labels came a long time after the Gita was actually said. So therefore you may ask, what is swadharma? Now many thinkers have given a lot of definitions of dharma in our scriptures, such as ahimsa paramo dharma, which means non-violence is our foremost duty, na acharat paro dharma, which means that behavior is our foremost duty, yato abhyudaya nishrayastasidi swadharma manushya dharma, which means humanity is our duty. And all of these sayings are correct. But in this particular verse where Sri Krishna is talking about karma yoga, you may ask, what is dharma? The swadharma that Sri Krishna is talking about here means the purpose of life. Now when we come into the world, God has sent us for a reason. In fact, Guruji says that according to him, each individual has come on a mission. What happens is the majority of cases, we forget this. The person forgets why God has sent him here. You may ask yourself, why have you come on this earth? And perhaps you may have even forgotten your own mission. We've forgotten the purpose and the very motive behind why we have been sent here by God. What is the reason that God has sent us here? We are the fields of pure potentiality. The divine force takes a human form because of a reason. We are all actually descendants of God. We are pure souls. Therefore, why did God give us a body, mind, an intellect, the senses, the ego? The reason behind this is swadharma. Thinkers have said very nicely that you have a definite purpose in life, a unique talent, and a unique way to express it. God hasn't randomly put someone into this material world. Every person has a unique talent, and we all have the strength within us to bring that talent to the fore. We need to bring that talent into being. And therefore, the first thing that we must do is find out what this talent that God has given to us. There must be such a work that we can carry out in the world somewhere, and it applies to all of us. There's something in the world that only you can do and that no one else can do as well as you can do. And there is something in the world that exists for you. And we must search for this. Guruji has explained that we should think, for example, if there's a beautiful job that we can do compared to anyone else in the world. Now we shouldn't, he explains to us that this is not, being selfish or having an ego, but this is actually God's compassion, because he sent us onto the world with this strength, and this unique strength is something that we should discover and try to find out. This strength should be seen as our potentiality. The seed of potentiality that God has put into everyone can be defined as their swadharma. Now there's another word here which we see in the last line, which is paradharmo. So paradharma is actually somebody else's strength. Now when a person has made efforts and found out their own strengths from within, we see the consequences of that in this world. So when we see it's natural, we're tempted to do that work. So you feel that particular person has succeeded in doing something, whether it's sort of opening up their own shop or setting up their own business or whatever it is, being a singer, a dancer, you try to copy them, you try to follow them because that's exactly what they've achieved, and you see that they have that unique skill and you try to mimic them. And this is paradharma. Now that person has become successful and succeeded in their lives because they have found the talent that God has put into them and has made good use of that talent. You may not have the exact same talent that's been put inside that person. You have another talent, and therefore you should try to find your own unique talent. If you try to copy someone else, in simple terms, Guruji defines and it gives us an analogy of a rose and a lotus, where a rose is closed and sees an open lotus. And it sees that the lotus is open and it would like to be like the lotus. It questions how it came into being like that. Now, the reason it grew into being like that is because it grew in dirt and it has water on all four sides. Now, if the rose frees itself from the rose bush and falls into the dirt with water on all four sides, it can't necessarily be a lotus. If it, on the other hand, had stayed where it had to stay, it could have developed. It would develop a lovely smell, and it would have given happiness into those that had passed by. Therefore, we could say that a rose's swadharma is to be a rose. If it tries to take the swadharma of a lotus and it goes into paradharma, it will lose its quality of being a rose. Therefore, it is not possible to attain paradharma, because this is the dharma of another person. You may have the illusion that you can attain it, but it is not possible. And this is why Sri Krishna says in this verse that to follow someone else's law is perilous and it is dangerous. Whoever is looking for their own swadharma should first discover their own true self. We should ask ourselves, who am I in reality? When we look at it in spiritual terms, spiritual knowledge often starts from this question, who am I? That's the question that people always ask themselves. You have two selves. Now, the first self we could perhaps call our original self, and the second is what we call the acquired self. So that's the original self and then the acquired self, which the acquired self is the one that you've actually accepted, but the original one is the person that you actually are. Now, in our lives, we often have a tug of war or a battle between the two. So perhaps symbolically, we could say it's a battle between your real face and a mask that you're putting on top of yourself. Now, this war is always happening. The face is swadharma and the mask is paradharma. So the face is yourself and the mask is paradharma, which is not yourself. The mask is always a temporary thing and can never be a permanent fixture. On the original self, there is a lot of dust being covered. Now, when enough dust covers it, then it becomes the acquired self. So the biggest attackers and hiders of swadharma that stop our talents from inside us are as follows. I'm going to list a few of them now. There's about 8 or 9. So the first one is worldliness, and this hides our swadharma. The second is helplessness and being forced to do something, and this will halt swadharma. The third is a fascinating illusion, which puts a cloud around your mind and will disable it from being able to make decisions. The fourth is pride, and this also hides swadharma. The original self doesn't come to the fore, and this fake self comes in place because of the pride that we have. The fifth, when we look at society and we see that customs often hide someone's real swadharma, a person gets stuck in the customs and forgets their true self. The sixth is expectations that don't allow swadharma to actually appear. And the seventh is the expectations of us from other people. That's, for example, when you continuously try to satisfy other people's expectations over and over again, and then swadharma gets lost in the process. For example, Prahlad, we hear the story of Prahlad, who kept on trying to satisfy Hiranyakaship's expectations that he would never be able to attain his swadharma. And if he'd continued to do so, he would have not attained his swadharma. Hiranyakaship was actually his father, and his expectation on Prahlad was that he should forget Bhagwan Vishnu's name. So in such a way, there are many expectations in society, and even from ourselves, that we have to continue to satisfy, or that we keep forcing ourselves to satisfy. And in the process, swadharma is lost. The next one is dependence that people have. The next one is hypocrisy, which then also hides swadharma. So when you have these thorns, they actually press down, Guruji calls them thorns, they press down on the original self. And the acquired self comes so much to the fore that the original self is forgotten. So your mask comes so much to the fore that your original face is forgotten. A person then forgets his swadharma. So I'm just going to recap those different facets. The first is worldliness. The second is helplessness. The third is a fascinating illusion. The fourth is pride. The fifth are customs that we have in society. The sixth is expectations of yourself. The seventh is others' expectations. Eighth is dependence, and ninth is hypocrisy. So these prevent us from actually being true to ourselves. A person who's, for example, when defining the form of yoga, Patanjali wrote in his Patanjali Yoga Darshan that Svarupe Avastam, and this means staying inside one's true form is yoga. Therefore, we should know our own true forms. But we first must discover them. God is very original. He doesn't repeat anything. Every single individual is different. Therefore, the first thing we must do is not compare ourselves to other people. God doesn't do any duplicating. For example, if we just look at our bodies, all the people that are sitting in this room, all our bodies are completely different. There are no two bodies that are the same. Even sons that are twins of a mother, they may look the same to the world, but a mother can see the differences between the two. They are different in reality. If one flower blooms and another flower blooms, then there's still a difference. There's a big difference. No two things, no two people, and no two situations are the same in the world, because God is incredibly original. Guruji goes on to describe God's originality, for example, in the concept of fingerprints in criminology. The police often use fingerprints to determine criminals more so than they use photos, because fingerprints are so unique to criminals, and our own fingerprints are so unique, and that's what spots us. And if you try to identify, for example, your fingerprints under a magnifying glass, you see nothing but lines and sort of crinkly circles. But if you start to try to draw these on a piece of paper, it's really difficult to try to make every single one of them different, but they all are, in fact, very different. You might be able to say do 30 or 31 of them, but then the next one will look exactly the same as the one you've done before. So what I mean to say by this is that, all of your 8 fingers and your 2 thumbs, they're all different. All the fingerprints are different. And if you imagine there are billions of people around the world who have these different fingerprints and different thumbprints. But in fact, it's quite interesting when you think about it from a criminology perspective that many criminologists actually say that humans in the world, and every single human being in the world that's ever been, and everyone that will ever be, will all have different fingerprints. So this is kind of explaining the point that God is very original and that no two people will be the same. There will never be 2 people that have the same fingerprints. Therefore, if in millions of years of history we all have a unique set of fingerprints that no one else has ever had, then we all have our own unique talents that we should discover. God will never repeat such an ordinary quality. Therefore, we may question, how different must people's natures be? How different must people's minds be? Even with regard to Swadharma, in the past, present and future, you are a unique person, you are a unique soul. There can only be one you. Therefore, we must try to find out what this unique character is that we have, that God has given to us. God has created us with great compassion and has given us a great talent. We must find it out, and this is our Swadharma. Once a person has realized this, then nobody can stop him. The biggest difficulty nowadays in today's world is, the reason for so much depression is that people have forgotten who they actually are and what they want to do and what their Swadharma is. And this is why there's a lot of monotony in lots of people's lives. People don't know much about Dharma anymore, and they've forgotten their Swadharma. People say, for example, if you put a red dot on your forehead and you put a necklace of beads around your neck, that you suddenly become religious. And people tell you to do this, and then you do it. And Guruji says that, fair enough, if people get mental peace from this, then that's fine, and it will give them a footing in religion, then that's fine. But what we should actually be doing is developing our own Swadharma. And once a person does this, they will be happy. Now, often in work, we see this. I'm sure lots of people have experienced this. That you may feel that you're born to do a certain job, but you end up doing something completely different altogether. Therefore, you may feel that you have a misplaced identity. Now, there's a major philosopher and author, Italian medieval author called Dante, and he describes the differences between heaven and hell, which perhaps you guys might think of in your work life scenarios. And he describes heaven is a place where a person is doing the thing that he enjoys, and hell is a place where a person does something he doesn't like to do, but he continues to still do it. So I'm sure people have experienced this all the time. Now, the latter is something that you have to keep doing, and it's not natural to you, and it's not your Swadharma, but you're forced to continue to do it. There's no other difference between heaven and hell. Today, many people in the world are misplaced. People that aren't capable of even being typists in the world are trying to become prime ministers. People that are capable of becoming prime ministers are working in a farm. That's quite interesting for today's politics, I suppose, if we look at it from that perspective. And people that could be, for example, talented business people didn't pursue that line of work in the end. And a person, for example, who could have been a true farmer or would have been happy doing that is teaching at school. And lots of people aren't satisfied with the jobs that they're doing and the work that they're doing. Therefore, you're probably wondering, okay, how do you find out what you actually enjoy? So Guruji's way of doing this is to sit quietly and at peace in a room and then to ask yourself a question. Imagine that you had all the wealth in the world and you had no worries about money and you had no worries about earning money. And that imagine if you had unlimited time and that time is not constraint on you. Then ask yourself what you would do. Imagine a situation where you have unlimited money, unlimited time. What is it that you would actually be doing with your time? If you get the answer that you would be doing what you're currently doing, then consider yourself to be in Swadharma and that you are happy. For example, if you're happy being a lawyer and you would want to do that even with your eyes closed and not being paid a penny, then that means you're in the right job. If not, then you're not following your Swadharma. Now you can decide this yourself because you don't need to ask anyone else. This only you inside will know. So if you get a different answer, then you are not in Swadharma. Your voice inside your soul will tell you, and it will never lie to you. Often we take the wrong line of work and we get stopped from doing our Swadharma because of money and time constraints, but we are encouraged to follow our Swadharma. If you realize you're doing a line of work that you don't enjoy, and then you remember that your mind is being filled with dissatisfaction, and slowly when this dissatisfaction gathers inside you, it slowly eats away at you, and you feel rebellious inside. You start to take your frustration out on society, and you get quite pressurized by society that you sort of become a sheep, and you feel that you are becoming a sheep. Often people will become depressed in this way, and life sort of continues to push on, and people just continue to do that line of work, but they're not enjoying it. Shri Krishna is encouraging us to find out who we really are, to find out our own true talents and our unique nature, and to use this in a line of work where we would completely lose track of time and forget about time and thoroughly enjoy it. Now this could be something like reading, it could be travelling, it could be painting, it could be music, it could be writing, it could be anything. It should be the type of activity that were you at home doing this activity, people would have to call you to eat around 8 or 9 o'clock because you're so thoroughly enjoying what you're doing that you've forgotten the time of the activity. And when you follow that activity, you'll find that your consciousness will be calm. For example, painting can be a devotion. Painting can be yoga. For example, when a person is painting, at that time, I'm sure lots of people have experienced doing this when they're doing something that they enjoy. Suddenly time stops running and they stop having bad thoughts. Your intellect remains steady. You feel calm and you can fix your intellect on God. Such a person will be in the state of Swadharma. You must stop running around your mind because Swadharma is your true potentiality. We must use that talent, though, for the good of society, as we saw in last week's class for Loka Samgraham, for the development of society and for the betterment of society. We should also use it for the development of your soul and to attain oneness with God. If a person can successfully do this through his line of work, then he is in Swadharma, and only then can he be successful. You see in many people's lives that they will find someone else's way of life attractive and decide that their line of work is interesting and therefore they'll try to copy it. But after 6 or 8 months, they will suddenly get bored and they will leave it and they'll realize it's not actually for them. If they begin to find someone else's work attractive and they try to be like them, their lives continue to go on like this. But this isn't right, because our first duty is towards ourselves, and our first duty is to find our own Swadharma. Therefore, the question will then come into our mind, why is it so hard to find out what our Swadharma is? Why does Paradharma seem so attractive to us? There's a reason behind this. The reason why it's so hard to find one's own Swadharma is that it is your unique nature, and you will be the first person to ever do it. You will be the first person to go down that route. Paradharma is always easy because it's someone else's route, and they've already gone down that route, and there's security and stability down that route. You don't need to be bold and courageous to go down that path. There's no need for originality on that path. You just follow the person like a sheep and you trace his steps. And that's why lots of people try not to find their own Swadharma, because it's easier to find someone else's path than to follow theirs, and because their other path feels safe and simple. And they're enticed to take their wrong route. But in this wrong route, Shri Krishna says that greed, anger and lust become prevalent. Move on to verse 36.